And I think any second now, we are, and of course it needed a we are there. We are live on Facebook and live on YouTube. And you guys are the most awesome in the Meaning of Life Design Zoom room. Okay. Happy Friday. And we also have captions turned on as requested at the stitch out on whenever it was that last Friday. Oh my gosh. This week has been a whirlwind of adventure. I've actually been out of town Monday through yesterday doing inspections on my brand new house. If you haven't heard, the only people who will have heard came last week to the Hearts and Kisses stitch out. I am buying a house in Oro Valley, Tucson. I am so excited about it. The inspectors, there was like a whole crowd of people that came to inspect this place. Like the general inspector, we had the roof inspected, we had the sewer scope done, we had the termites, which are a fairly big thing here in Arizona. I think that was it. Everything got such a clean bill of health. I am so happy. It's like this house is meant for me, and it's beautiful, and I can't wait to show it to you. We have a little bit of time before that's going to happen. We close on July 25th, which I think is Wednesday. Well, I'm not 100% certain about that. No, maybe it's not. I don't know what day of the week it is. And we actually move on July 31st. Maybe that's a Wednesday. I think July 31st is a Wednesday. Whatever. The end of July. It's going to be all exciting stuff. So, if you see me, remember to ask me, are you still breathing, Sarah? We have so much stuff happening here. I am so excited. We got new projects coming along, and there is a ton of packing to do. I have decided if it doesn't fit in a 26-foot truck, it ain't coming. So, Habitat for Humanity may be getting my studio furniture, the IKEA kitchen cabinets. Somebody put me in touch with those. There's also a children's home organization here that somebody put me in touch with. So lots of good stuff happening. Okay, let's see. We have some questions, and I have them in front of me. We are actually same spot that I did the stitch out in last week. If I hold something up to show you and stuff goes funky, it is because I'm not actually sitting in front of the quilt. I am, in fact, sitting in my studio with the kitchen and the mess. So I figured you don't really need to see that, but just to let you know what is happening here, we will put this back. Okay. Let me see. Judy, you are up first. Come to ask you to unmute here. We're going to spotlight you and spotlight me. Okay. Am I right in thinking that your sister persuaded you to buy a new embroidery machine?
You are so right. She just insisted.
Is she
And I
here?
was having a few issues, and so she pointed me in the right direction.
Yay. Wendy, good for you. I know that was a topic up for discussion when we all were wandering around the state fairgrounds back in
Yes.
whenever was that?
Oh,
back in earlier this year. I can't
Yeah,
remember when it was,
February,
but
March maybe.
something like that. Yeah. Anyway, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for you. You've opened up a world of possibilities.
Big hoop and excited about that. And I just couldn't get the P1 design to open up.
I'm going to
And
tell you exactly why that is.
okay,
Do you know the dimensions of your big hoop?
I know that I didn't even have the hoop. Oh, well, I shouldn't say that. Um, I it's the big hoop, and I don't have it handy here, so I can't tell you what the dimensions are.
It is always a brilliant plan to have the dimensions in millimeters of your embroidery hoop.
Okay,
So let me see.
I did put on
I'm
a
just going to
two
pop
seven.
in.
Yeah,
You did actually write it down. I'm
yeah,
looking at it. So you did fill it in on your on
yes,
your so 272 by 408 millimeters.
yes.
That is the size of the biggest hoop for the Brother Luminaire or the Babylock Solaris. I don't see Wendy here. Is Wendy
She said she might be a little late coming in.
okay? But for everybody, it is a really good idea to know the dimensions of your hoops. For the most part, they are written on the hoops. I know my Brother hoop has, and Joe was saying, what machine did you get? The Brother Luminaire. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the
So,
Luminous
okay,
XB3.
awesome. Um, so yes, definitely one of the best things you can do for yourself is know what the sizes of your hoops are. It will really help you when it comes to figuring out which designs can I stitch and which hoop do I need to do it in. For applique, you always want to look for the biggest hoop possible. Actually, not necessarily. For applique, you typically want to go with the smallest hoop possible that the design will actually fit in. For quilting, you want to go with a bigger hoop so that you've got a little bit of extra space to get your alignment really perfect. So for the most part, 200 millimeters by 300 millimeters, you should have one of those with your luminaire. 240 by 360. I think you should also have one of those. And then this giant thing, which is the 272 by 408. And when you know those, you can go to any of our instructions, and it typically starts out with if your hoop, or if you have a hoop that is at least however big, then you can use this design.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, if you have a hoop that is this big, use this design. So let me share my screen. Whoops, don't need to do that. I want to do that. And we're all prepped here for, let me hide the floating controls. So the circular vase versus the tall vase, those two pages look pretty much the same, apart from you can tell we've got tall vase here, circular vase here. I also have the designs opened, and they're both set to 30% scaled. So this is P2, the circular vase, and we're talking about the 3D
Holdings.
collection mini version.
Right.
So this is P2, which is 30%, and this is P1, which I've also got at 30%. So the circular vase, the center panel measures, if we do a select all, okay, that's the tall one. Let's go to the short one. It measures 254 by 381. So that will fit into your big hoop, which is 272 by 408, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
P2 will fit. P1, on the other hand, still 254 wide, but is 431.8 tall. So it's actually too big to fit into that hoop. And
Okay.
if you pop into the instructions for the tall, so we're looking at the tall vase. I'm actually saying if you have a hoop that's at least 260 by 440. So I've added a little bit to say you need a hoop that's that big, and your hoop isn't,
Okay.
because it's only 408. Now, having just told you that the actual design measures, what does the actual design measure? I can't remember, 254. So I think the new Janome, was it the M17 Continental? I think it will fit in that hoop, which is why I left this full thing in there. But you want to go down to the next part. If you have a hoop that's at least 240 by 360,
Yes.
then you're going to stitch it actually in 3 parts.
Okay.
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 So you really do need to go to the instructions, and it will tell you exactly which design or which combination of designs to use.
Okay.
One thing that, let me see where my stop sharing that. One thing that is interesting about the Brother machines, the Baby Lock machines, for sure, and I'm not sure about the FAFs and the other brands, they literally will not, and the Genomes, they literally will not load a design into the machine if it won't fit into one of the hoops that you have, or one of the hoops that the machine will recognize. So generally, anytime you've got a design and you maybe can't even see it on the USB stick, or it just refuses to load, it's because the design is not going to fit into any of your hoops. On the Bernina machines, interestingly enough, it will load the design, but it will give you a warning flag that it's outside the size of the hoop.
Okay.
So just 2 little variations in the way the different machines figure that out.
Okay. So my choice is I can go to the small vase or do it in 3 parts. I'll figure that.
That's your choice. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's actually a really interesting way of putting the choice.
They're both nice. I just chose the cutout for the tall vase first. So,
Okay. Yeah.
all right.
So I either stitch it up in 3 hoopings or skip the tall one and go to the short one, because you can do it in the one hooping.
Okay. Thanks, Shara.
You're welcome. That's a funny way of doing that choice. Okay, let's see. My iPad has gone to sleep here. I have not that you can see that, because anyway, let's see. Lisa, let me find my participants list. Now, the one thing about being sat over here is I do not have my big screen. And so I don't have everything right there. Lisa, coming to ask you to unmute here.
Okay.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very frustrated.
Uh-oh. Now, you're stitching the butterfly. Are you taking Jeremy's class?
Yes, and I've been working on these diamond borders. It seems like forever, but it's been like a week. I'm not a cutter and a piecer. It's not I'm just have been doing embroidery, and I wanted a challenge, but I didn't realize how much of a challenge this was going to be for me, and maybe it is for others as well. So basically what happened is I've got the 2 side strips and the 2 long strips made, but and if you tell me I have to do them again, I'm going to stop making this, so don't do that.
can I let you in on a little secret first?
Yeah.
This might help you feel better.
Mm.
Actually, I'm going to tell you two things. Hundreds, literally hundreds of people have made the butterfly. Now you can choose have that help you feel better or not, but it's definitely a possibility. I got a text message, actually got two text messages from Jeremy earlier this week. And he's like, Sarah, I need to call you immediately. I mean, like, he was in a major upset, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't actually get his email until the following day. Anyhow, we wound up on a FaceTime call, and he's like, Sarah, the center of my butterfly is, or it wasn't that, what he actually said was the quilting is not fitting into or onto the quilt top, right? So he was choosing method one, which is make the quilt top with where you've got center, you've got the borders added, and then you do the quilting, and then you do the applique on it, right? That's method one. Method two is you make the quilt top, you put the applique on it, and then you do the quilting. So he was trying to make the first hooping of quilting fit. And he said, it's going into the borders. I have no idea what am I doing wrong. And so I said, okay, show me what you got and get your measuring tape out. And first off, let's measure the size of the center part of the quilt top when he gave me the measurements. And it was something along the lines of 25 by 35. And if you look in the instructions, and I have these pulled up right here, the center should actually measure 27.5 inches by 35 and 7/8 of an inch. So 27.5 inches, actually 27 inches tall, 35 and 7/8 of an inch wide. And his was significantly smaller. So it was like, okay, let's measure your actual squares. And there are, I think, 2-inch squares and 1-inch squares on the quilt, right? And they're on point. So measuring them as squares, he was almost 1/8 of an inch too small on both his big squares and his little squares. And by the time you add up all of the squares or diamonds on each side, I think there's 6 big squares on the sides, 8 along the top and the bottom. By the time you add almost in the 1/8 of an inch error up over 6 and the little squares as well, you're getting into a sizable error, right?
Right.
So what Jeremy said was he had been piecing on a different machine, I think with a different foot, and his 1/4-inch seam was actually a jumbo 1/4-inch seam allowance, which is why his center turned out to be way too small. So have you measured the actual squares? Because tell me your dimensions again for your center.
Well, I haven't cut it yet.
Okay, but you've got the strips, right? For the top and the bottom and the sides. What are the measurements on those?
That's another place
You haven't got there yet. Okay.
No, I have. My dimensions are too short. The short ends, the side ends are 27, and the long top and bottom are 35. So I'm a little short.
Okay, so the shortness is probably because your seam allowance is bigger than 1/4 of an inch when you did your piecing.
I don't see how that's possible because I have been so careful.
Can you measure this? Measure the actual squares?
Sure. You want me to
You
measure?
have them with you right now?
Yeah, yeah. You want me to get up and measure it? Okay. Be right back. In my sewing room, just in case you ask me to do something like this. So It's a 2-inch square for the large diamond,
Yeah.
and it's a 1-inch square. Wait, hang on. That's where it is. It's a not, I'm short on the 1-inch square. It's about an eighth of an inch short. So that's,
Okay. That's probably, well, that's almost definitely why your borders are coming up too short.
yeah. Okay. Got it.
Now, you said if you didn't want to hear do it again on your
Yeah, I
piece
know that's
borders.
probably what I'm going to hear, but go ahead and say it.
Well,
I
so
try not to
there's a couple of
scream.
options. There's a couple of options for you. One of them is to repiece,
Right.
and it's not just your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Whenever you're piecing, and I think this is where a lot of people fall down. You might have an exact 1/4 inch seam on your seam allowance, but your pressing is going to make a difference as well. So it's a combination of your seam allowance and the way that you're pressing something.
How am I supposed to be pressing it?
Well, let me just pull it. I got these blocks here. So I've been, hang tight. Let me get rid of the background. There we go. Because that makes it easier to hold stuff up to the camera for you. So this is half of one of the kisses blocks, right? Now, I've actually trimmed the seam allowances down to 1/8 of an inch.
Right.
Just because I like things to be neat and tidy, and also because we've got the situation where there's always going to be a seam allowance under the light color. So if you trim that seam allowance clean, then it's less likely going to show through. Anyway, when you stitch and you've got your 2 pieces of fabric right sides together and you do your 1/4 inch seam, you actually more than likely want that to measure ever so slightly less than 1/4 of an inch. Because then once you've done that, you're going to press one piece of fabric away from the other piece of fabric, right? So if we look at this piece here, this long strip here, it was stitched right sides together like this, 1/4 inch seam, which I then trimmed to 1/8 of an inch, but let's pretend I didn't trim it yet. So 1/4 inch seam here. When it's opened up, you want to make sure that you're pressing it so that you've got a really tight fold here, right? Now, when you're testing your seam allowance, it's actually a really good idea to get 3 pieces of fabric, measure them. So these guys actually have a bit of a strange measurement, but if you start out with 3 pieces of fabric that are, let's say, 1 inch wide and maybe 3 or 4 inches long, right? Stitch them together with 1/4 inch seam. So piece 1, piece 2, piece 3. Piece 1 and piece 2 go together, 1/4 inch seam. And then the combination of 1 and 2, you add 3 1/4 inch seam. Press everything either to one side, or depending on how your colors are working out, you might want to press both of the sides away from the center. Then measure how much you've got in between the 2 seam lines.
I don't follow what you're saying. There, that part, what you just said.
Okay. I got 3 pieces of fabric here, right?
Yep.
Piece 1, piece 2, piece 3.
Got it.
And just for a sample, you can make them all 1.5 inches wide.
Got it.
They only need to be 3 or 4 inches long. And you're going to stitch them together, right? Now, for this particular sample, because I've got the light color in the middle, I've got the seam allowances going under the darker colors, right?
Right.
So this is pressed away from that. This one is pressed away from that. Then measure how wide this is in the center.
Got it. Got it.
Now, where's a ruler? it actually turns out, and I haven't trimmed any seam allowances here. Let me see. I can get that lined up and keep it lined up on the camera. Apparently not. Okay. 1 inch wide for the light color in the center, right?
Correct.
So that's a 1 inch wide piece of fabric. And if I'm measuring the seam allowance on the back, let me hold it up again. If you look really closely, I don't know if you can see exactly where the stitching lines are,
Yes.
but
They're
one
like,
side for sure is ever so slightly inside the
yes.
1/4 inch line and the
Yes, I
3/4
see
inch
it.
line,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we measure from the front, and I will say I do not guarantee that this is a perfect seam, this should measure 1/2 inch on the front. And if you measure it from the back, as we just did, you might think, okay, there's a seam allowance that was a little bit on the scant side there, but if you measure it from the front, I think we are actually at a perfect 1/2 inch.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So even though one of these seams, they actually, both of them could have been ever so slightly scant 1/4 inch seams when I was measuring it to actually doing my piecing. I allow for the fact that when I'm folding or pressing the seams, that is going to have an impact on the size of the seam. Right?
Right.
So, and I think, excuse me 1 second, we've got, I went outside earlier when I was having my lunch. I have a chair sitting out here that I sit and eat my lunch on. It was covered in pollen. There's a lot of it in the air right now. So when you're piecing, you want to be aware of your 1/4 inch seam when you're sewing, and you also want to be aware of your pressing, because not everybody presses the same. You know, and you add the two of them together to figure out your 1/4 inch seam settings.
Got it.
Okay. So back to your butterfly border, one option is repiece it. And I
Mm-hmm.
know you didn't want to hear that,
Mm-hmm.
but hopefully I've given you a few tips on how you can make sure that you end up at the correct size. Another option, if you really don't like piecing, would be just would be to have just a plain border around. So keep the cornerstones in each of the corners and just have a solid piece of fabric on the top and the bottom on the both sides to eliminate piecing all of those diamonds.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because you have and I don't actually know what they are. Let me have a look here. Actually, let me share my screen and then you can see what I'm looking at. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So when you come to add these guys on, they're 4 inch 4 inch corner squares. So if we go back to the cutting, you've got 2 pieces in ocean 4 inches by 4 inches and 2 pieces of pear 4 inches by 4 inches. So if you were to cut your strips for the top and the bottom, so the sides cut 4 inches by 27.5 inches, 2 pieces that big, and for the top and bottom 4 inches by 35 7/8. Then you could eliminate the piecing.
I understand what you're saying. I don't think it would look nearly as nice as what the sample shows on the picture.
Yeah, the sample, that definitely putting the diamond border on it is going to add, just that little bit of extra
Right.
to the quilt. So you're um just taking a look at your piecing is going to be your best bet here. It might be the case that it's not so much a matter of starting from scratch, but at least separating these units and restitching them together. Or you might even just take a look at your pressing and see, can I make that? Can you make the pressing of, when you're opening up these two units here, can you press them so that it's a little bit tighter of a fold and a little bit flatter?
Right.
And you might actually be able to press enough length
Right.
in to make them the right size.
Okay.
Okay,
All right. Thank you.
you're welcome. I hope that helps. Let us know how you get on.
If I ever get past these borders, I will let you know.
Okay, well, we got people here cheering you on, and you can always jump into the Facebook group.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see. We had one more question that came up from Peggy. Let me see where this whole looking at life on a small screen is kind of interesting. Peggy, coming to ask you to unmute here.
Okay.
Now I've lost you on my list. Okay. There you are. Hi. How's it going? Okay. So Peggy said, you're working on Practical Joy and your hoopings are not lining up properly. Suggestions on how to improve your process. Now you actually sound like you're doing all the right things. So you're marking your stabilizer, measuring it, marking it, remeasuring it, and then basting. Stitching color number 1 and positioning your background fabric. You're using positioning pins at each intersection, plus at least 4 more pins, left, right, above and below the intersections. Pinning it in place, you hold up to a light and make sure that the lines drawn on your stabilizer, drawn and basted onto your stabilizer, match up with what you've stitched up onto in the hoop. Adjusting and repinning as necessary, but something's still going awry.
So let me
Let's
show
see
you my
what you got
block.
exactly.
Okay, so where's my camera? This
Here you
bottom, this second
Go
hooping.
up a little bit. Or, okay, I see where you look. Okay. So where the body of your pot is attaching to the
Right, and unfortunately, this piece that doesn't line up is the very last section that's done. So I didn't know it wasn't going to line up until I got to that point. So I've measured this. It looks like on one side, on the left side, it's off by less than 1/8 of an inch. And on this side, it's off by just more than 1/8 of an inch, which tells me it might be not just off to the side, but crooked a little bit.
Yeah, so something is just a little bit out of alignment somewhere.
Right.
And the question
I
is where?
The mechanics of what I need to be doing, but I'm missing the execution somewhere and I don't know where. This is the third block where this has happened.
Okay. So chances are it's when you are doing your alignment. I'm gonna hazard a guess that it's when you're actually doing the alignment. So you've got the stabilizer and the hoop, your stitch color number 1, and now you've got your quilt top, which has been marked up. You've got the stabilizer on the back of it, and you've basted the stabilizer to the background, and you're trying to get the background fabric onto the stabilizer and the hoop.
You kind of lost me there.
So you've got a piece of stabilizer in your hoop,
Right,
and you stitched color number 1,
right,
right? I don't have a piece of stabilizer handy, but I got a hoop handy. So imagine there's a piece of stabilizer in here.
right,
So you've got your hoop, it's an intersection, at least one intersection. For the bigger designs, there's typically 2 intersections.
right,
Okay, so then on the other hand, you've got your background fabric. You've drawn your markings onto a piece of stabilizer. You've basted it onto the background fabric.
right.
And now it's a case of getting the background fabric and the intersection mark there aligned with what you got on the stabilizer in the hoop.
Right.
How are you doing that alignment?
So I'm putting my hoop with the stabilizer in color 1 stitched on a wool pressing mat.
Okay.
Laying my quilt top on that, putting a pin through the quilt top, and then lifting it up to see where it needs to go into the stabilizer. So I've got a pin that's going straight up and down. And then I'm doing positioning pins beside that, and pulling up the side of the quilt block to make sure that that line is going straight, that the lines are matching from the back. The stitch line on the background is matching the stitch line in the hoop. Putting another positioning hoop. So now I've got, let's say, 5 positioning pins, and I'm making sure they stand straight up like little soldiers. And then I start pinning the background to the hoop, to the stabilizer in the hoop, and make sure those pins still stay vertical. Pinning all around those, and then once I've got everything pinned, 6 or 8 pins, then I'm pulling out the positioning pins, holding it up to a light to make sure everything still matches. If it doesn't, then I'll readjust 1 or 2 lines as needed.
So it's possible that something is shifting between doing your check, looking through from the back, and actually putting it on the machine.
Okay.
It sounds like that's the only possible point that something is shifting. So I have a suggestion for you. If you could see my table right now, it's a disaster area. So I'm looking for is my double-sided tape, and it's over there. Never mind. So when you are, when you've got your stabilizer in the hoop and you've stitched your intersections on it, instead of putting pins, well, you want to do the pins as well, but put some double-sided quilter's tape around the outside of the hoop, not all the way to the edge of it, but probably to the ends of the placement lines. Like a good long bit down both of the sides, a good long bit at the top and the bottom.
What am I taping?
Well, you're putting double-sided quilter's tape onto the stabilizer.
Okay.
In the hoop, right? Then you're going to do your thing with pins to make sure that everything is aligned. And instead of pinning the background fabric to the stabilizer in the hoop, you're going to whip away the backing tape off the quilter's tape and stick the top onto the stabilizer in the hoop.
Okay.
So there's less of a chance that it's going to scoot around.
Okay.
Okay. And maybe see how that goes. It sounds very much like you you know what the technique is. So the only thing that I can think of is when you're doing the pinning, maybe the pinholes are getting a little big. I don't know, I'm making up guesses here. And you know, whilst you're holding on to it, it's looking good and you're doing your double check, but by the time you got to the machine, there's just a little tiny bit of shifting.
Okay.
Whereas if you put the tape to hold the background fabric onto the stabilizer and the hoop, it should be pretty much stuck there.
Okay. So what one additional check I can make to verify your theory is after I have done that basting line, I need to take it off of the machine and look again to see if it's still lined up.
You could do that. Another thing would actually be to go back to color number 1 and check the position of the placement line.
Okay.
And then you can fine tune it. You can always do that. So have you done any of the quilting yet?
No.
Have you done any of the quilting in the hoop on any project?
Not on anything this big. I just finished the butterfly and I actually did used your designs to stitch on my long arm instead of on my embroidery.
Okay,
So,
because your butterfly is
nothing.
Beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I love it.
Good. It's beautiful.
I did a black and white. I don't know where it is. I did a black and white version of block 1 because I was doing a program for our guild and I wanted to talk about all of the different ways that you could quilt, whether it's hiring a long arm or doing it yourself. And I did just the black and white, no applique version of block 1, Joy block 1. And I did all of the quilting in the hoop on that. No problems there. No significant issues.
So you're familiar then with using color number 1 as an alignment line?
Yes.
Not as a placement line. So you can do the same thing. So first off, stitch it on the stabilizer as a placement line.
Right.
Get the background fabric onto the stabilizer and the hoop. And even if it's just as a rough guesstimate of where it needs to go, then go back to the machine, stitch the basting line, which is the first part of color number 2. And before you actually go into any of the detail stitching on color number 2, go back to color number 1 and use it as an alignment line.
Okay, that's a good idea.
And that way you can get it absolutely spot on.
Okay. All right, that sounds like that's a good idea. I'll try that.
Okay. And so try the double-sided tape for holding the background fabric onto the stabilizer and the hoop, and reusing color number 1 as an alignment line once you've stitched the basting line.
Okay, let me just show you this. I'm working on block 4, I think. So I've got my positioning pins in here. And you can see I don't know that you can see this, but on the back of the block, you know, I held it up to the light to make sure everything's lined up. So I'm right at the point that I either need to take this out and use the double-sided tape or go back to do the basting line and do what you just suggested to get that. If you haven't
done the basting line at the beginning of color number 2, you can just use some of the double-sided tape to make sure that it's really stuck where it needs to be.
Right. That's going to require a trip to the store.
Well, if you don't have any on hand, skip that part and just use color number 1 as the alignment line.
Right. I'll give that a try. Yeah. The other thing I did, and it's really a lot of work, and I hate to keep doing it, but I went back to the art version of the designs and I isolated just the applique placement lines. So I can bring that design up and just make sure, looking at the applique placement lines, that they're going to stitch where they need to. But your idea is much, much easier than trying to go edit all of those designs to isolate just the pieces I need. So for this one, the hooping number 2 should be easy, but hooping number 3 on this block, I've got like 3 rocks that sit on top of the leaf. So the placement's going to be pretty persnickety on that. So I want to make sure I get it right.
It sounds like you're heading very much in the right direction.
Okay. Okay, a couple of great suggestions. I appreciate that, Sarah.
You are very welcome. And come back and let us know how you get on.
Okay, I will.
Okay. Nice to see you, Peggy.
Thanks, you too.
Okay. Let me see back at my list of questions here. That was actually all of the questions that were asked in advance. I will let you know I have not paid a single bit of attention to the chat here. Vicky. Vicky said I've been busy. Veggie garden, long arm, and life. Yes, I am moving. Did I tell you where I'm moving? I'm moving to Oro Valley. It is northwest Tucson. So Heather has been living in Tucson for the last 4 years while she's been at University of Arizona. And you get the whole story tomorrow in tomorrow's email, but I'm going to tell you all right now. So Heather is 22. She turned 22 in January. So she turned 22 last year. No, she turned 21 last year. And ever since she's been a teenager, she actually wanted me to become a foster parent. I'm like, that's not in my life plan, but if that's in your life plan, then go for it. And you're not allowed to do anything in the foster world until you turn 21. So the very minute she turned 21, she did all of the training required to become a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate. And I think that took about 3 months. And then she got to choose, they gave her a handful of kids to choose from who had said they would like to have a CASA, and she got to pick who she thought she could serve as a CASA. And so she picked this young man who I guess was 16 at the time, and she has been supporting him for the last year. He got himself into a spot of bother with the police just before the end of the school year, and her mama bear has come out. It has been the really most interesting thing to watch her as she's helping this young man go through his troubles and dealing with all kinds of stuff, including getting suspended from school. Anyway, she decided that in order to give him the best opportunity for a future and to keep him out of jail, basically, she could invite him to come and live with her, and she could become his foster parent, foster mother. I kind of am thinking more foster big sister at this point. He just turned 17, she's 2, so not really that huge age gap. And we were having a conversation one day on the phone, and then it's like out of the mouth of babes, out of the mouth of mother came, if I was to move to Tucson, I could be there and kind of help out with this whole foster parenting situation. And the more I thought about it, the more I loved about this idea. And I started looking at property in Tucson. It is a whole lot easier less expensive to buy nice property in Tucson than it is to buy in Chandler. And it worked. I found a house. It's gorgeous. So Oro Valley, Tucson's kind of down here. There's a mountain range here, and Oro Valley is on the end of the mountain range. I look east right onto Push Ridge. It's beautiful. I'm so excited to get moved in there and have you guys see my beautiful view. It's going to be so good. And I get to be a foster grandma. I'm so excited. Okay. Let me see. And another thing, Peggy, Jan has mentioned every once in a while her machine, it gets bumped, and that will also throw off alignment. So if it's the odd occasion when alignment isn't working, Jan, yes, that is absolutely what might happen. And I've definitely had that happen to me as well. Yeah, and then Marilyn said after you put the hoop on the machine, you go back through the placement lines and step through them as we talked about. So use it as an alignment line as well as the initial placement line. Jan lived in Tucson for over 10 years. Oh my goodness. You could always move back to Tucson. I know you've been in San Diego, I think vacationing, and I know that you live in Pennsylvania, but Tucson is growing on me a whole lot. Anyway, let's see. Does anybody else have any kind of question that we can answer in the next 6 minutes? Bryony, I see you there in Scotland, right? I am excited. I am getting ready to buy my plane tickets to come to England in September. It occurred to me that I need to see if I can fly out of Tucson Airport instead of driving an hour and a half to Phoenix. Actually, probably more like 2 hours to Phoenix to fly out of here. So, Wendy, I see you've joined us. Yay, sis, for getting Judy set up with her new machine. I'm so excited for her. That was brilliant. Okay, let's see if there aren't any more questions. Okay, so I see all three of the Q-tips here. Marilyn, Joe, and Susie. This time next week, there is going to be a Q-tips reunion, and I am declaring that I am now officially a Q-tip, or I'm an honorary Q-tip. But anyhow, we are all converging on Susie's house next Friday. The Q-tips get to meet for the first time ever in person. I am so excited. Marilyn said we will be 1 hour out of Texarkana at this time next week. I am so glad that you have your time. So all I know is that Doug and Joe are coming to pick me up at some unruly time, like 4 o'clock in the morning. Jasmine did comment, am I expected to take you to the airport? And I did say, no, you are expected to stay home with the dog because Doug is taking us to the airport. So, okay. You put me in charge of meal planning. That is a really bad idea, Joe. Okay, I can have a workshop at my house when I get moved in. You know, one of the things that I love about my new house is that there are 2 living spaces. So you walk in through the front door into a big space. I did measure it because, you know, you have to measure these things and make sure that all of the furniture fits. And that is going to become the studio. It's known as the wooden floor room because there's a wooden floor in this in this first bit. And then you go through into a living room, dining room, kitchen area. So I can actually have a living room, dining room, kitchen, and I can have a studio. And I'm so excited about that. So, you know, having a workshop at my house is actually maybe possible. Who knows? Okay. So Susie said it's going to be a huge culture shock for the 3 of us. Who are you going to get to do some mowing? That is what I want to know. Maybe Marilyn, because Marilyn is good at the mowing. I see Marilyn doing some finger pointing. You would be pointing at Joe, right? Joe, I am not going to read your thing out. Okay, so enough is enough. We are, let's see what is happening. We are Zooming next Thursday. Hands up if you're coming to the Hearts and Kisses Stitch Out. Yay! I know Kathy and Marilyn have got their blocks all stitched out. I actually have 2 10-inch blocks. Let me just flip back into, I have 2 10-inch blocks all ready to have hearts appliqued on them. And I have all of the hearth blocks ready. These guys get to be stitched together for the 5-inch blocks. I have them in 2 colorways. So that is a job for tomorrow after I have packed up a bunch of books. Jackie, I see you have your hand up here.
I didn't realize I did that.
You know, depending on which device you're on, if you just make any kind of a waving motion, it will actually put your hand up.
Oh, okay.
It's like, okay, yeah, there's a setting somewhere in Zoom that you can wave, because I know I have a tendency when I'm on Zoom with my family on Saturday mornings on my iPad, and I tend to, wave my hands around, and then it's like, oh, okay, thumbs up, hand up, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, it's good to see you, and I will see you next Thursday at
Thank
the
you.
Stitch Out.
Yes.
Okay, so next Thursday, Hearts and Kisses Stitch Out Session 2, all about applique. I will see you there. If you're not signed up, read tomorrow's email and get signed up. Have a fabulous week and do a whole lot of stitching.